Not only we use logic to reveal certain patterns in the world, but also logic uses us in a way. Logic predetermines the ideas that we are able to come up with. It only allows us to follow certain routes and keep an infinite number of other ideas forever inaccessible to us. Greetings, this is Eugene the philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video I wish to talk about logic, and how logic itself kind of forces you to fall into certain ideas. This is the idea, no pun intended, that I call quantization of ideas, alright? So we'll briefly discuss that somewhere near the end of this video. And hence, why some of the ideas are inevitable in a way, like they almost force us to think them, or something like that. So basically how our logic predetermines the ideas that we can come up with. This is what this video is about. So it's like our minds are wandering in a sea of chaos where only like discrete islands of stability exist, which again are predetermined by our patterns of perception and thinking, aka logic, alright? But first, let's start with a multitude of examples involving both logic and just other things in general, because again, this pattern can be generalized. The pattern of you being controlled by what you think you are in control of, like the tools that you use, logic included. So an example might be physical theories. Like, I claim that there are really only two possibilities for us to perceive the world, that is, like, the objects in the external world, and even our own bodies, so to a degree, like, internal as well. So, I talk about this more extensively in my Onion of Aliens Part 2 video, which I'm gonna link in the description with a timestamp, so you'll already arrive at the needed time there. So, again, I claim there are two types of perception of physical objects. We can perceive them as solid bodies, like roughly speaking atoms, you know, solid balls of matter, or as mediums, as like some extended, spread out kind of stuff, right? Again, examples of which we know from like basic experience, like air or water and things like that. So all the physical theories, I claim, are forced to describe reality in this way, like utilizing either the first approach, everything is lumps of matter, like solid balls of matter, or the second approach, everything is a medium, right? Something like that. So you might, roughly speaking, exemplify the first approach as Democritus' approach, or Newtonian approach, you know, corpuscular approach, if you wish, where we talk about atoms. You know, Democritus himself said that everything is made of atoms and emptiness, right? So this first approach is about atoms, right? But there is a second approach about emptiness, about the mediums, you know, this spread out kind of stuff. So we can talk about wave mechanics, right? Or quantum fields, or ether, etc., etc. So it's this, again, this dichotomy of res cogitans of Descartes versus res extensa of Descartes again, right? The cognitive stuff, which is, roughly speaking, the soul or an atom, something indivisible, solid, and being, or extended stuff, like geometrical stuff, the medium, the emptiness, right? So again, this is the very basic pattern of our perception, and all our attempts at describing the world are shoehorned into one of these two shoes, if you wish, alright? So again, ether theories, even the very sophisticated ones, like Paul Laviolette's theory of subquantum kinetics, a very interesting theory, which describes particles as basically places where one ether transforms into another. So it's like a quasi-chemical approach to physics, if you wish. Or the most fundamental theory of everything, which is a quantum field theory nowadays, right? It's considered to be the most fundamental. It also describes everything as a bunch of fields, a bunch of mediums, if you wish. And how it describes particles, well, it's just a place where the field is excited, right? It's not in its main state, but rather in its excited state. So yeah, these are only two possibilities. So we are predetermined. If we want to build a physical theory of everything, of the world, we are predetermined by our logic, by our patterns of perception to either go this way or that way. Either we talk about atoms or about emptiness, about particles or about ether, roughly speaking, right? Or fields, if you wish. Again, electromagnetic field is the same thing as ether. I don't know why people make such a big deal out of it. And again, if you can invent an alternative, then I would be glad to listen to it, all right? Like, I'm really interested. But I don't think there is an alternative, really. Okay, so, yeah. And in general, again, this pattern can be generalized, how objects in general force you to behave in a certain way. In this case, the object was, again, our perception of reality, if you wish, our basic pattern of cognition, which again forces us to perceive the world either as a bunch of particles or as an emptiness. So in the same way as I described in my video, Reciprocity of Power, link with the timestamp in the description, your furniture, for example, controls your motion. And really any external object actually controls your motion, so it predetermines your behavior in a pretty major way, right? Like you can't just walk straight, like you as a being of a free will, like a divine power, you can't like actually walk straight even in your own house because there's a wall. So the wall forces you to walk in a certain manner, right? So the wall actually controls your behavior in a pretty direct way, okay? So yeah, and in the same way, as I claim in this video, your logic controls you, even though you might think it's a tool that you use. Everything is in air quotes. Well, it also uses you, you know. So there's a peculiar manifestation, if you wish, of Newton's third law. In case you don't know what it is, well, it means that if one body acts on another physical body with a certain force, then the second body exerts the very same force on the first body, just in the opposite direction, right? So in the same manner, if you control a tool controls you, right? Just in some weird opposite type of way. So yeah, like nowadays people are like, in the last 30 plus years maybe, people are going crazy about ergonomics and stuff like that. But I'm not sure if they realize there's this darker side to it, if you wish. So not only you build devices and appliances in such a way that they're convenient for humans, let's say, but in a way, the humans are built by the devices and appliances they use, right? Meaning, like, any physical object that is designed to be frequently used by humans alters their behavior in a major way and perhaps even makes it habitual, right? Like the proverbial, you know, like this deformation of your neck because you keep looking at your phone screen or something like that. Like, yeah, it's a quantifiable anatomical difference that arises from the design of the phone screens that we use, right? So yeah, like a hammer controls your hand to behave in a certain way, right? You hold it like this, then you swing it like this to hit the nail, etc. Because it's built in this way. And like, imagine instead of a hammer, you would have something else, like a pile driver type of machine that is like a box which you just put on a nail and it just like nails it in, right? Like your behavior would be changed. You wouldn't swing your hand like this. You would just put this thing like this. So there you go. But this is obviously just a minor example of the more general pattern that we've already discussed, let's be honest. Okay, we could have also talked about large supportive networks behind what a nail is, why the nail is designed in this way, which again relates us to the division of labor, how factories work, why we design them in such a way to automate the processes, to make them more standardized, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, there's a large network of stuff behind all of that, obviously. So yeah, there are more vague examples in art, for example, no pun intended. Forgive me for my tautology. Like music, for example, should be written in such a way that a human can sing it or play it on an instrument, alright? Like, you know that, like if you've ever studied music, like harmony, for example, you know that the listener actually subconsciously sings the melody, always, pretty much, right? Sometimes not even subconsciously, but then actually. So a melody is considered good if a person, like it feels good, if you wish, to listen to. If a person feels good thinking that they actually sing it, not the guy or girl who is actually singing it, but the human, the listener, I mean. If the music is somehow inhuman or unnatural, it makes the listener feel unnatural and bad if they imagine themselves singing it, right? So they wouldn't like it in this case. And in terms of instruments, obviously, it's purely technical limitations, like both due to biomechanics of whoever is playing the instrument and due to the possibilities of the instrument itself. I mean, obviously, various instruments cannot, like, are not 100% replaceable, let's put it this way. Of course, nowadays you can write stuff for a computer to play, right? You can even embrace and exaggerate, like, the inhumanness of your music. And some people do that, but again, it's nothing more than a quirk, you know, a curiosity. Like, it's never going to be really popular among humans, at least, right? And think about dances. Also, dance is limited by the array of possible motions of a human body, etc., etc. All right, so let's return to the logic after all. So all of this applies to logic as well. Like, not only you control logic, use it as your tool, but logic in a way, like, predetermines where you can go, right? Logic is like a maze that, like, only allows you to go here and there, but not everywhere else, all right? So the question might arise, like, how much is our thinking and our logic inherent to the world itself? Like, okay, some areas of thinking, some types of logic, let's say, are inaccessible to us, but maybe it's fine in the sense that the world doesn't have them in the first place, right? So we don't need them to describe the world. Well, our logic, I would say, is definitely inherent to humans, but humans are the expression of the world. And we are built in such a way as to accommodate, you know, physical laws and chemistry laws and biology laws, etc., etc. And of course, you might say all these notions can be deconstructed separately, all these laws, etc., etc. But let's limit ourselves to the naive picture where these laws are objective in reality. All right, but of course, even though of course they're also invented by humans and for humans and to fit some specific purposes at the time they were invented, right? But anyway, so returning to the question, in a way, our thinking does correspond to the world because we are ourselves the expression of this world, right? So it corresponds to the world at least to the same degree that we do, right? Something like that. We as humans, I mean. I remember one thought from Stanislav Lem's Golem. So there he talks about, like, using this Golem, which is an AI, as it's his mouthpiece. Lem, that is the author, he says that like he kind of redefines the evolution. So he says, like, evolution is when only what expresses the environment better remains, right? Not what survival of the fittest, but the survival of expresses, I don't know, like survival of whatever expresses the environment better, right? So the environment speaks through the forms of life that exist in it, something like that. Just an interesting idea for you to ponder on. Okay. But another question might arise, like, how strict is this limitation, like, of us by our logic, I mean? So how, can you bypass it some way? Can you invent alternative logics that would be viable, right? And this is a good question. And I would say that probably not, actually. Like, there is a more or less well-defined domain of normal logic. And whenever you step out, you become almost unidentifiable, right? Almost like people don't understand what you're even talking about. And we have some examples, like there are fringe cases where people clearly try to step beyond, like, the normal logic. Like, we have cases like Hegel, for example, with his book Science of Logic, right? Which is, again, I've already told you, like, my stance towards it, that there is no science, neither science nor logic in this book, really. Like, it's certainly an alternative, right? It's certainly a special logic with all the according connotations to this word in English. But it became pretty popular thanks to Marxists, right? And thanks to Hegel himself being basically the main philosopher of Prussia, right? So basically his job as a philosopher working for the Prussian government was to justify why Prussia is a cool place to live in, is a great country, and should become the leader of Europe, or at least Germany, right? Before the German unification. So, but factually, as it is, at face value, so to speak, unfortunately, it is a Masonic gobbledygook, all right? His Hegelian logic. So you either work inside of it, inside of Hegelian logic, and thus you can at least communicate with other people unfortunate enough to share this environment with you, alright? I mean, unfortunate by the fact that they are in this environment, not because you are there with them. Or you work in actual human logic, and thus you can communicate with normal human beings, alright? So, yeah. So here I wish to remember my redefinition of objectivity, which I gave in my video, Nature of Knowledge. See the link in the description. Perhaps I'll also add the timestamp, but we'll see. So, in my definition, objective means anything that can be communicated to others, regardless of whether it's true or not, alright? In this sense, yeah, maybe Hegelian logic, like if you train people in it, it is objective, and it is sort of viable in some very weird way. But I don't know. Again, it's a very fringe case. So, but it's an interesting experiment in a way. So maybe, I don't know. But I'd rather say no, you know. Rather no than yes. But maybe. Okay, so this is my answer. Alright, and a couple of weeks ago I've actually encountered, just randomly, like scrolling my newsfeed, I've encountered people talking about theodicy, like in French. It's a term coined by Leibniz, obviously, but in his book he was writing in French. Again, obviously, because nobody cared about German. In early 18th century, it like barely existed. There were just a bunch of dialects. Again, no unified Germany existed by then. So in English it's theodicy, right? Theodicy. So what it means is basically justification or vindication of God. So it actually is sort of relevant, this issue of theodicy, to this video. And what do I mean exactly by that? Well, what's the issue with theodicy? So it deals with the problem of the paradox of evil, right, in Christianity, or perhaps in some other religions as well. So the paradox is, like, if God exists, how can he tolerate evil, right? So the paradox may be formulated as such. We assume, like we just state as an axiom, that God is omnipotent, that he can do everything, basically. He has ultimate power. He's benevolent, which means he wishes good, right? And he's omniscient, which means he knows everything, all right? But at the same time, evil exists. This is an observable fact, right? So we arrive at the logical paradox, like why evil exists. So if God is omniscient, he knows about the evil, right? Which means that he's either not benevolent, so he doesn't want to he doesn't want to rectify evil, or he's not omnipotent, so he maybe want to rectify the evil, but he can't, right? He doesn't have enough power. So you arrive at the paradox, right? Well, my friends, in the context of this video, I can give you the answer, right? I just told you that we as humans are controlled by logic just as much as we sort of control logic, or at least use it to our benefit. So an easy solution to this paradox of theodicy exists in this context. So the solution is such: if God is omnipotent, he is beyond logic, period. Like, if God has ultimate power, then logic has no power over God, if you know what I mean. So your paradox only exists because logic forces you to see it as a paradox, but God is above logic. So there's no paradox, for him at least. So he has more power than anyone and anything else, including logic, so the logic doesn't control him. So it's my version of theodicy, if you wish. Like, you are not omnipotent and omniscient, so why your logic should confine God in any way? Good question. And I haven't seen anyone actually talk about this in this way, so at least one original idea for you for today. Okay, so one interesting consequence, I've briefly mentioned it at the very beginning of the video, of this approach that I've just described here, how logic controls us and forces us into like very structured, very discrete patterns of thinking, is Mandela effect, for example. Like, people are still confused by this thing, but I believe that this approach allows an easy explanation. Well, maybe not so easy, but at least an explanation, all right? So Mandela effect is a phenomenon that, social phenomenon that people have noticed, like, I don't remember when, like maybe 15 years ago. So apparently some people, in case you haven't heard about it, even though it's kind of a commonplace nowadays, so some people have, some researcher, I don't know, have noticed that there is a group of people, like actually a large amount of people, who think that Mandela was never released from prison, right? That he died in prison, actually. And apparently there's a lot of people who believe that, all right? And since there's a lot of people who believe that, so they have like false memories, essentially, of what happened in the world. So this was called Mandela effect because of that, all right? So what the effect itself deals with is, again, like false memories, like people, somehow large quantities of people believing that something was different than it actually was, which can be confirmed, you know, documentally. So yeah, and I've actually described this effect already and this phenomenon of quantization of ideas that I'm going to talk about briefly right now in one of my previous videos. I don't remember which it was. I think it was Repentive Thinking. Again, link with a timestamp, see below. But my explanation is, again, quantization of ideas. So what it is our logic only allowing us to follow predetermined pathways, all right? So in the same manner, it may be applied to our memories. So in one version of our memory, let's say Mandela actually was released from prison, became the president of the South Africa, or whatever his actual position was. In another version, he actually died in prison, right? So these are like perfectly viable, logically possible ideas, all right? And so you fall either into one category or another. Almost like, you know, the energy levels in an atom are quantized. So there you go. So that's why, like, there are a lot of people who believe that what actually happened is true, that Mandela was released and became a president. And also a lot of people believe, maybe not so many, but still a lot of people who believe that Mandela died in prison, but there's nothing in between, if you wish. Or maybe there are some, like, very fringe cases in between which are rarer, right? Something like that. But this is my explanation, if you wish. Okay. So, and the same goes for any other instances of Mandela effect. All right. One other interesting conclusion from this approach is that any technology that can be invented, for better or worse, will be invented, all right? Because if logic allows one pathway through the maze and another, then some people, sometime in the future, maybe, I don't know, maybe on some desolate island, they will take this pathway. Some people will take that pathway. Some people will take that pathway, all right? So this is the case of, you know, the proverbial mad scientist who, like, releases demons or whatever. So any idea that can be followed will be followed, at least by someone, at least sometime, all right? So yeah, and in this respect, like, science fiction is a good playground of ideas, because it does exactly that. It tries to explore these pathways that are available and can be seen, logically available, that is. So if you wish, you can make an analogy between science fiction and society, like one block. An analogous block would be like mathematics and physics. So mathematicians develop things that may not be useful yet, but they are logically possible, right? They develop theorems, lemmas, like whatever types of alternative spaces or whatever. You get the idea, right? It may not be useful yet to describe the world, but maybe sometime it will be, right? So in the same way, science fiction develops ideas and, like, logically thinks them through and like researches how they could potentially impact the humanity, for example. And it may not be possible yet for perhaps technical reasons or whatever other reasons, but maybe in the future there will be. And we know for a fact that often it happens, right? Often what we see today was already predicted by science fiction like 50 years ago or 70 years ago, just because, again, it's logically possible, therefore it can happen sometime. Today, for example, all right? All right. So, to conclude this rant, not only we use logic to reveal certain patterns in the world, but also logic uses us in a way. Logic predetermines the ideas that we are able to come up with. It only allows us to follow certain routes and keep an infinite number of other ideas forever inaccessible to us. For better or worse, it is what it is. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.